Listener discretion is advised.
The spirit we were speaking to was a soldier from Yemen, killed in 1984. He quite enjoyed the afterlife, or wherever he was at the time. He made it very clear to us that death was not the end, and that there was nothing for us to fear in the afterlife.
Hello everyone, welcome to Scary Time. Today's featured podcast is They're Not Shadows. I'm Greg, the host and curator of Scary Time. Every week I find a scary or paranormal episode that I think you will love from an independent podcast creator. They're Not Shadows features spooky listener stories of the paranormal, the supernatural, and the unexplained. If you like today's episode, please click the link in the episode description to subscribe. We're going to get this show started after a quick word from our sponsors.
Begin.
Our first one today is a ghost story. It's titled Mrs. McKenzie. I was 12 years old, and we lived next door to an elderly woman. Every day, when I came home from school, she would be sitting on the porch. I'd stop and we'd chat for a while, asking her about her day and what she did. She liked me and told me I reminded her of her son when he was young. One day, I came home and saw she wasn't sitting on the porch. It was a little unusual, but I didn't think too much of it. But the next day, when I came home from school, she wasn't there again. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so at around 6 p.m, I went over and knocked on her door to see if she was okay. There was no answer, so I looked through the window and saw someone walking towards the back of the house. She appeared to be wearing a white robe. I knocked again, and like an annoying 12-year-old, kept knocking. She'd given me a key, which I'd never had a reason to use, but this seemed like a good reason. Inside the house was eerily quiet and much colder than it normally was. I called out, "Mrs. McKenzie? Are you okay?" At first, there was no response, just me standing there in the cold and silent house. Then I heard a very faint "yes" coming from her bedroom. I was about to go in there when I was overcome with a feeling of fear and apprehension. I quickly left the house and went back home. The next day, I saw Mrs. McKenzie's son and a few other people out the front of her house. I knew the son. He was also very nice to me, so I went over to say hello. He lived quite far away and had come to check on her when she hadn't answered her phone for a couple of days. He then told me his mother had died 2 days ago. I got goosebumps. I asked if he was absolutely certain she had died 2 days ago, and he said yes. I went back home, but didn't tell anyone, fearing I would be looked at as crazy. I don't know if it really was Mrs. McKenzie that I saw and heard the day after she died, but it still gives me chills. Seeing a ghost in, say, an old abandoned building can be terrifying. but at least you can run away and go home. But when it happens in your own bedroom, well, what do you do then? I'm a grown man who believes there's a rational answer for all things. I don't believe in ghosts or other paranormal stuff, but I'm not so closed-minded that I'll dismiss it. This is something that happened last year. My wife and I went to bed at about 10 p.m. At around midnight, I was stirred awake by a small sound, and when I opened my eyes, I saw the figure of a man next to my bed. I couldn't make out his features because it was dark, but he was sort of hunched over, as if he was creeping around the room and trying not to be heard. I screamed in a way I've never heard myself scream before. Then jumped out of bed. Being peacefully asleep 1 second, then seeing a stranger standing next to your bed the next, it truly was a terrifying moment. Then my wife started screaming. I looked to her, then back to the man, but he wasn't there. I looked in the closet and saw nothing. Then I looked out in the hall, where our German Shepherd sleeps. She was acting totally normal. If there had been someone in our bedroom, she would have barked. I did a quick check around the house, bathroom, kitchen, but nothing. I was sure I saw someone, but as I started to calm down, I began to think maybe it was sleep paralysis. Even though I've never experienced it before. I started to breathe easy and headed back to the bedroom, convincing myself it was all in my head. There's always a rational explanation, right? Back in the bedroom, I apologized to my wife for screaming and making her scream. I said, "Sorry." I woke up and thought I saw a man standing next to the bed. She looked up at me and said, "Yeah, I saw him too. That's why I was screaming." We were both terrified. How could we both have seen the man next to the bed? One sleep paralysis, sure, but two? Of the same vision? We eventually went back to sleep, but when we woke up the next day and talked about what happened over coffee, we realized just how strange an occurrence it was. We both described the man the same, no features because it was too dark, and a build smaller than I am. The more we talked about it, the scarier it became. It's the only event in my life that I can truly call paranormal, and I still cannot explain it. I'm writing this in the same bedroom where it happened, and a year on, it still scares the hell out of me. Ouija board stories are normally cautionary tales, but this one is a little different. Twice in my life, I've used a Ouija board. The first time didn't seem to work that well. The board was a bit dodgy, and there was one person in the group who I was certain was moving the glass for theatrics. I couldn't prove it, But I had my doubts, as the answers to the questions were sketchy at best, and a lot of them just didn't make sense. There was one thing, however, that may have proved it was real. For weeks after, our cat would sit outside the doorway and stare into the room that we did the Ouija in. We all thought that was weird, as he'd never done it before. I thought perhaps we did make a connection, but maybe our setup was wrong or our etiquette was off. Either way, I remained largely unconvinced that we had contacted actual spirits. The second time, though, was an entirely different outcome. It was a few years later, and I'd moved across the country to attend university. One night, some of my friends and I got onto the topic of Ouija boards and decided we'd give it a go. But this time, we'd do it properly. One of my friends was quite an esoteric sort of guy, and he did some research on how to do it correctly. None of the others had tried Ouija before, so we were mostly going in blind. My friend made us a proper Ouija board setup and even used a sage smudging stick to cleanse the room of bad energies, as he put it. Once that was done, the four of us sat down and got to it. I was still very skeptical and was carefully observing the other guys to see if they were messing with the glass at all. But throughout the entire session, the movement was so fluid and precise that all my doubts quickly evaporated, and I was genuinely astounded that there was a supernatural entity with us. The conversation we had with the spirit was so clear, yet so bizarre, that I'll remember it forever. One thing my esoteric friend said was that courtesy was paramount. So we started off asking if there were any spirits available to speak to us. And when we got a yes, we introduced ourselves and asked if it wouldn't mind speaking to us for a bit. Another yes. We apologized for intruding and made it clear the spirit did not have to answer any questions it didn't want to. And then we began our questioning in earnest. I won't type out a transcript, but here are the basics. The spirit we were speaking to was a soldier from Yemen, killed in 1984. He quite enjoyed the afterlife, or wherever he was at the time. He made it very clear to us that death was not the end, and that there was nothing for us to fear in the afterlife. He said the concept of heaven and hell was untrue. He also said reincarnation was possible, and when I asked if it was a Buddhist style of reincarnation, we received a yes and a no. I took that as meaning sort of. After all that, we decided to wrap things up, having had our minds blown. We said thank you to the spirit and wished it all the best. We also waited for the spirit to say goodbye to us. This is important, according to my friend, as it allows the spirit to return to its own realm easily. And that was it. I walked out of that room with a strange feeling of bewilderment, yet also enormous relief. If what the spirit said was true, and I have no reason to believe it was lying, then death is almost something to look forward to. I'm not sure if this next one is about a doppelganger, a time slip, or something else. See what you think. This is something that happened when I was 12 years old. My parents were in the kitchen getting dinner ready, and I was in the backyard playing football with my friends. My parents heard the garage door open and close. Then I came into the kitchen, walked past them, and went upstairs to my room. Normal, right? Then, 2 or 3 minutes later, they heard the garage door open and close again. And again, they saw me walk through the kitchen and head upstairs. Not so normal. They stopped me on the stairs and asked, "Who just went upstairs a couple of minutes ago?" Thinking maybe the first time wasn't me, that it was one of my friends. Confused and a little concerned by their demeanour, I replied, no one? My parents told me what had happened, hearing the garage door open and close twice, then seeing me walk through the kitchen twice. Every detail, down to my body language, was exactly the same both times. Copy and paste, like someone had rewound time and replayed me entering the house. It would be a strange occurrence if even just one person were to see this, but both of my parents watched this happen. And even now, when I sometimes bring it up, their stories match up perfectly. It really seemed to rattle them. It's something that has totally stumped us, and we have zero explanation for this insanely bizarre incident. Insanely bizarre indeed. Our next one takes us to the coast of Sao Paulo. This happened when I was around 4 years old, so this is my mother's telling of the story. I had a babysitter at the time who would stay home with me while my mum was at work. I always insisted on waiting for my mum in front of the building we lived in, which was located near a factory that recycled plastic. The nanny would always hold my hand pretty tightly to prevent me from running towards the street, as the factory had a lot of trucks coming and going. This particular day, I saw my mum waiting to cross over. The nanny was distracted, talking to a neighbour, when I saw my mum and decided to run over to meet her, just as a truck was approaching. I pulled free of the nanny's hand and ran straight to my mother. My mum screamed. She knew there was no way the truck could stop in time. Oh no! She closed her eyes and begged God and a saint, I don't remember which one, to save me. And when she opened her eyes, I was standing next to her, confused as to why she was crying and shaking. The truck driver got out, quite distraught, and started looking for me under the truck because he was certain he had hit me. My mum asked me to explain as best I could what had happened, and I simply said that lady helped me cross the street, and then I pointed to her, but my mum said there was no one there. It sounds like something from a movie, I know, but this really happened. This next one is quite a scary one, and much like our earlier story, these horrors also took place in a bedroom. My girlfriend and I moved into a new apartment at the beginning of the year. One night, we were lying in bed when my girlfriend suddenly stopped talking and froze. She started breathing very heavily. And when I asked her if she was okay, she told me to shush. After a while, she calmed down and told me she'd seen a woman standing next to the bed, staring at me. We blamed it on sleep deprivation, as we do tend to party a lot. But over the following weeks, my girlfriend experienced more of these sightings. It was always the same, the woman looking down at me, or a man in the corner of the room trying to get my girlfriend's attention. It happened again a couple of days ago, but this time was different. It started the same way, my girlfriend seeing the man in the corner of our room. I started joking about it, not too kind, I know, but at that point I was still skeptical about it. My girlfriend told me I really should be quiet for a moment. Then I saw a look on her face that I'll never forget. She grabbed my arm very tightly, and after about a minute, she said she had the feeling that something had scratched her. We do have 2 cats, but neither of them were in the room with us, and they're not the sort of cats that randomly scratch us for no reason. I looked at her shoulder, and there was a big scratch mark. That was the moment when I started taking it all seriously. The following day, we did some research and agreed that we not make any more jokes about it and ignore it. Last night, we watched a movie, then went to bed. I was woken by my girlfriend, shaking in bed. After not responding for about a minute, she started to suffocate. Thankfully, though, she woke up and snapped out of it. She told me she had seen it all happen from outside of her body. She said she watched herself in bed from the corner of the room where she normally sees the man. She felt she was being pulled into some other place. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it wasn't a good place. She was scared the whole time she was telling me this. Then her whole demeanor changed. She suddenly became very calm, then casually said, "Babe, let's just go to sleep." I was weirded out by this. Just a second ago, she was almost panicking, and now I saw a really calm look in her eyes. I told her I wanted to continue talking about it, but she just kept pushing me to go to sleep. I had the feeling something was terribly wrong. She just didn't seem herself. I tried testing her with a few jokes we always made with each other, but she didn't react, at all. She just kept saying, "It's fine, let's go to sleep." And there was something else. I noticed she was lying on her back. She hates that and always lies on her side. It felt like I was in bed with a stranger. Then she started shaking again. I didn't know what to do, but thankfully, after a few seconds, she stopped shaking, and then she was herself again, but she didn't remember a single part of it. We don't know what this thing in our house is, but there's one thing that we're sure of. It has very bad intentions. Our final story today comes courtesy of Hemfrey. It's called Night in Guadalupe. And I'll see you next week. I live in Arizona and grew up in a small Native American and Mexican community in a town called Guadalupe. I was around 13 years old, and a friend and I had gone to the mall outside of town to see a movie. I grew up with my grandma, who was quite strict about me being home early. And as it was getting close to midnight, we were hurrying home, walking on a dirt track that ran alongside an old canal. I had my head down and was thinking about how much trouble I was going to be in when we heard something up ahead of us. It got closer, and we couldn't believe what we were seeing. It was an old-fashioned flatbed wooden cart, like something you'd see in a cowboy movie. It even had wooden wheels. There were a couple of men walking alongside the cart, and they were wearing ponchos and sombreros. But this is the crazy part. No horses were pulling the cart. It was moving along the flat track by itself. It continued coming towards us. Then, just before it reached us, it turned onto one of the roads that lead into the neighborhood. We didn't say anything. We just turned and gave each other a look of, "Yep, I saw that too." We hurried up and soon made it to the road where the cart had turned. And it was gone. We were looking at an empty road. We just stood there in the moonlight, trying to process what we'd just witnessed. Then my friend said, "Look," and pointed to the ground. There were no marks in the dirt from the cart's wheels, and the only footprints were ours.
Thanks again for listening to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Check out all of Indie Drop-In shows at indiedropin.com. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com.